Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Superhero Ethics Podcast. My name is Matthew Westfox, and we're really excited. This week we have not only Paul as our normal guest host, but also a special guest, our friend Logan, who's going to be talking to us today. So, Logan, why don't you say hello?
Hi, everyone. How are you? My name is Logan Grendel. I am a writer and a dog man, I guess is my most official title. But also wrote a graphic novel a while back, actually 10 years ago, called Harlequin's Song, which is about a post-apocalyptic New York City. And it's certainly coming to bear that it looks like we're going to be facing a world a little more similar to that sooner than we thought we might.
I was going to say, post-apocalyptic stuff, that sounds very escapist right now. Totally different from anything else we're
right.
Also, I'd say wrote and photographed with a fantastic cast, by the way.
Yes.
Yes.
Do we have any members of that cast on our screen today who want to also say hello?
On our call, yes.
Sorry.
Our cast? I don't know. What do you call it?
I'm dreaming of the future when this is all in video.
Oh, very good. Very good. If we have webcams, maybe it already is, but just not only on the NSA's video.
Right.
Anyway, Paul, say hello. Please.
Hi. See, your mind control didn't work on either of us.
There you go.
It's
myself, Paul, and Logan. So yeah, Logan, want to start just by giving you a chance to introduce yourself a little bit more. Talk about what got you really loving comics and what made you to actually make one.
Yeah, so I've been a fan of comics my entire life. They tell a lot of stories in a way that is a little bit where reality is pushed forward into more like the realm of imagination, but it's obviously still, it all comes out of what we really live. And I think being able to take stories further than reality just highlights reality a little bit more. It's one of the reasons that I actually enjoy, people like Oliver Stone, who, as you say, they say they overdo things, but really what they're doing is they're kind of just making it so that you can't miss it, which I think a lot of people do when you make it more subtle. And that's one of the things that I love about comics, is that, you can have a hero that has these abilities which are supernatural or preternatural, but, it just ties into something that's very deep within the human psyche. And that's, I think, one of the reasons that there are different superheroes that resonate with different individuals. It's because, it's an ability or a fear or something that they take and they highlight and they amplify it in a way that, makes it more than real, but kind of just highlights the real.
Oh, for sure. My mother, she was the one who first introduced me to Star Trek, and she loved the original series. And one thing she always said she loved about Star Trek, which I don't think of as comic book, but I think does the same kind of thing, is that it would take a situation in our real world and then create an alien world that changed it enough to make us think about the real world in a new way. And I think
exactly.
You're right. Comic books kind of do something very similar.
Yeah, and in my own graphic novel, it was basically I very literally overlaid fantasy on a perceived reality. I had a series of dreams which kind of led to I sort of weirdly predicted the financial collapse of 2008, but I sort of added to that a near human extinction because of virus and because of a lot of other things that were going on. Some of I added biblical predictions and just other fears in the mass mind. And, the financial collapse did happen, but we just kind of kicked the can down the road, right?
Right.
Another however many years. I'm going to hope.
I think 8 years. I think we kicked down the road 8 years.
That's it's true. And what I did was I took my, the heroes are people that I knew. And so instead of making up entirely heroes out of thin air, I took people that I knew who were sort of people who might be on my apocalypse team, as it were. And I gave them superpowers which came from their real personalities. And the mechanism by which people acquired these superpowers was that they reached their absolute limit and it just flips a switch. And, it takes whatever their ability is from normal to superhuman.
Right. And I think there's something really beautiful in that idea of, that in a person's worst moment is when their best can come out. And certainly I think that's something that I'm sort of hoping we're seeing a little more of in the current world.
Let's do that.
But very much believe we are. Yeah.
Well, and I want to talk more about that and this idea of dystopias in general, I think is going to be our main topic today. Dystopias, specifically V for Vendetta. I know is one that we all really love and been talking about, and this idea of what role violence can play in that, lethal and non-lethal, and even just how those terms can be problematic. But first, Logan, I want to give you just a chance to talk about. You said you used people you knew in it. One thing I love about your graphic novel is the way it's not just drawings, the way a lot of, or paintings, or that kind of artwork, the way a lot of
however they make comics.
Yeah. I don't know the technical term, but obviously what you did with Harlequin's song is a little bit different. Can you talk just a minute about what you did there?
Yeah, so before I became a dog man, I was a photographer for a very long time, and I can't draw a straight line with a ruler, so I figured I would just take my skill and amplify it. So it was sort of another level of overlaying fantasy on reality. So I we kind of guerrilla shot it. We took over subway trains and found streets and off in the cut locations. We didn't really we didn't get permits or anything. We just got people and we did it. And then I spent months I designed a series of actions in Photoshop, which gave it a sort of a comic feel, but left a little bit of the grit of reality on it. And that made it able to kind of just throw on the little superpower, the extra special stuff.
Uh-huh.
And yeah, it was like a marriage of basically everything that I was into at the time. And I'm a big fan of doing things on multiple levels, where you have the idea of the thing and then you have the actual way of making the thing, and they're both built on the same idea, where you have the real and you have the the fantastical, and it's just bam, just smash it all together, and there you go. Yeah, it was very, very painstaking. I can't say whether it would have been easier. Well, actually, I can say it would have been easier to draw it, because drawings, they will be there when you want them to be there, and you don't have to worry about moods and acting ability and time.
Yeah, actually directing a cast is its whole, and I mean, and the cast in particular, it's a little bit of the cat herding thing.
Definitely, working with professionals was was an obstacle in and of itself.
And it was really cold outside some of the time.
It really was. Well, it was,
And I think that's kind of since so much, as Paul and I have both said, I think Paul has read a little bit more of the comic books than I have. But for the most part in this podcast, we're talking about movies and TV shows that are based in things that started as comics. So I kind of love what you're talking about there, because yours is obviously a book, but it's a book with a cast of live actors. And I think it's a wonderful marriage of those two. And yeah, for anyone who is listening, definitely check out Harlequin's song. Logan's going to get a chance to talk at the end more about it. You can find it by looking on Facebook at facebook.com/Harlequin song. Definitely something worth checking out. And as you mentioned, Logan, it's a dystopia. And I think that's kind of a good place for us all to start, is because I think that's going to be our main topic today, is dystopias, and specifically V for Vendetta. But for you guys, what is it that you love about dystopias? I mean, the world sucks enough as it is. Why do we want to read about or see a movie about a place where it's even worse?
I hate dystopias. So I'll let Logan answer this one. I've had enough to hear with the apocalypse, and now that
I love dystopias because a lot of people for years have been calling me kind of a gloom and doom person, and I've been unfollowed on Facebook by lots of people because I talk about a lot of the messed up stuff that's been going on, the things that the No Dapple protests. They received such little media coverage, and to me it's
I just want to say, because of how little media coverage they've gotten, some folks may not know what we're talking about. Dapple is the pipeline that they want to build in the Dakotas through Indian land, and possibly do real damage to the water supply of an Indian tribe there. So just wanted to do that brief intro, because Logan, as you said, it's gotten so little coverage, a lot of people don't even know about it. But go on.
Dakota Act pipeline, yeah. And about obviously police violence this is on track to be the worst, deadliest year for police violence in recorded history, and that includes the time before the civil rights movement. And things are actually really bad right now, but in ways that a lot of people, especially people with a little bit of money, whether they are conservative or liberal, have just been ignoring. Right? So it's easy enough to say that things could get worse, but for me, the dystopia kind of just it's like it allows people, like you were saying earlier, Matt, like that taking it to the world of fantasy allows people to actually look at the reality that's in front of them in ways that for some reason they often seem disinclined. So for me, it's not that I enjoy dystopias as much as I think that they are very, very necessary tools for allowing people who really need to see certain things to see them. Because it's if we don't, it's like 1984 and Brave New World, like, you could call them dystopian fantasy, or you could say that they were just a little bit off in their predictions. Because if you combine those two books, you have the world we currently live in. We are currently being surveilled. We are currently being, medicated beyond all reason. Those two books are, even though they seem to be totally different, it actually is the world that we live in right now. And if you were to say that to someone, they would think that you might be, you're being melodramatic, but it's very much not melodramatic. And the reason that some people can't see that is because they're, if you're doing pretty well, the world right now is the best world it ever has been. And in many ways, that's true, but not for very many people in the world, right? The people who are even, say, the top 30, 40% of human beings are doing pretty great, but 60% and below, they're in the hurt locker right now. And, they're not getting the help they need from those people who are in a better position. So dystopias are really useful.
And I think that's a really good point. And I think about how, a lot of my certainly a lot of my favorite, and I think some of the best dystopias are written when things are already pretty bad, at least from the perspective of the people writing them. And often it's not about saying, hey, even though things are great now, they could be worse. It's more about saying, we know that things are really bad, and let's try to make people wake up to how bad they are by turning the dial up from 10 to 15. Like I think
exactly
about, like you said, 1984 and the other things Orwell wrote as well, Animal Farm. Those were all written either during or immediately after, the worst that was seen of both fascism and Nazism and communism, and how each of those books like shows a side of that. And V for Vendetta, which we're about to talk about, that's written by a British person at the height of Thatcherism, and he's trying to show about Thatcherism going even deeper. And then the movie is written at the height of the Bush administration, and trying to talk about how that could go even deeper. Right. I think the first Hunger Games books came out during the Bush years. I don't remember when the first Hunger Games books came out.
I think
I don't
wrong.
remember, but that would make sense.
Okay. It may have been under Obama, but certainly when the economic crisis was still really bad. And I know, a lot of people I've talked to who talk about, when they were young and first read the Hunger Games, that part of what they loved was that it really showed, like it got them to think about the economic problems that were happening and where it could go. And also just the idea of like violence and the way violence is in the media in ways that they hadn't before.
Right.
Yeah, you're not wrong. It actually was at the very end of the Bush administration. It was end of 2008. So
okay, yeah. So it's kind of written then, and that's certainly when also all the economic stuff was happening, and even there. I mean, I know that her, from the interviews I've read with the author of The Hunger Games, her point wasn't as much a political commentary as it was a commentary on, violence in media. And the way violence is made something to enjoy instead of something to be seen as terrible.
Right.
So, for sure. So, so Paul, for you though, what do you not like about dystopias?
They're too much like the shitty ass world we live in. like shit's bad enough. I don't want to see something even worse. I definitely agree with like the potential usefulness of showing something that's like, okay, so here's something that's worse than what we've got, but it's kind of pointing out the things that are already bad.
Right.
But as much as I agree with that point, I'm gonna play a little devil's advocate here.
Sure.
That, what if some people see dystopian, or like post-apocalyptic stuff, and they're like, well, at least it's not that bad, and kind of have the opposite reaction. Where they see like,
unfortunately, that's quite possible.
That's and I mean, I think both things are probably true, right? There are probably some people who feel that way, and then some people who are like, oh shit, that's the world we live in,
Right.
And yeah, it could get worse. I mean, I don't know what sort of crazy world events might lead to it getting worse.
No, but I think it's an interesting point, especially because I've seen a version of this being played out just in the last couple of days in a very real way, in terms of, you know, if there's any moment in this world's history where you've come the closest to actually living in a dystopia, it was probably in Nazi Germany. At least that was one of them, of many. And I've recently heard people saying things like, okay, you know, no matter how bad you think Trump's going to be, he could never be the Nazis. It could never be Hitler, you know?
Right.
Which I think it's almost a little bit of that same thing you're talking about. Like, because we've had that level of dystopia in the real world, there's an inability by some folks to see that what we're dealing with now could be really bad as well.
Yeah, like people are like, oh, well, you know, I mean, you're just being hyperbolic comparing him to Hitler. It's like, well, I'm not comparing him to 1943 Hitler.
Right.
You know,
Right.
like
Right.
we're comparing him to 1933 Hitler when Hitler wasn't Hitler yet.
Right.
You know, and
Definitely.
things didn't have to go that way in Germany. That wasn't like, I mean, okay, if you take a fatalistic view, fine. But like there are so many variables. It's not like one domino sets the course. Wait, I feel like this is relevant to the movie.
I feel like the authors of Legends of Tomorrow might have some arguments with you, but this is why.
Yeah. Well, you know, those time traveling, that, you know. Anyway, the point though being that like at any given point in time, at least starting with the information that we have,
Right.
like there could be a wide range of outcomes. Like when people look at this election result, which I think we should say this is November 13th, 2016, right? For anybody listening to this a year from now, it's like, what are they talking about? What happened? Oh, right. You know, I mean, people gave like the pollsters a lot of flack, and by people I mean Logan. No, but a lot of people, and I think to a point, there's a lot of valid criticism there, but I also think that a bigger point is that people just have a tremendously difficult time understanding uncertainty, and basically just because this was the outcome that we actually got. Right. Doesn't mean that it was necessarily the only possible outcome, or that it was the only, or that it was the most likely outcome given the sort of the data set that we had available. So we can go back and look at the data and say, oh, so the Huffington Post thought that he had a 1.4% chance of winning. All right, I'm pretty comfortable saying like, well, they had it really, 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 really wrong. You know, right. I mean, then again, sometimes there is something that has a 1% chance of happening, and like it happens. Right. You know, but. Yeah. I mean, at the time, I was like, get the fuck out of here with your 4% chance. You know, meanwhile, 538 had like 27% on election day, which, you know, we can argue is too low, right? That maybe it was more like 50-50. Maybe it was more like 72-27 the other way. But like, what we can't do is look at 27% and say like, oh, they said this wasn't going to happen. No, they didn't. Right. They said there is a very real chance that this is what's going to happen. And out of that 27%, more than a third of it, like 10% of the overall possible outcomes was like Trump wins the Electoral College, Clinton wins the popular vote, you know? Yeah. And like that's a scenario that could happen, and like, oh, it happened. And so that kind of discomfort with uncertainty and having trouble understanding, like I remember when right after the nominations were secured, it was like, oh, Hillary Clinton has an 80% chance of winning. And people were like, are you kidding? That's like, they're saying she's going to win. And it was like, I think, yeah, maybe that was optimistic because they weren't taking into account, you know, things like the email thing and how people would react to that. Right. But they weren't saying she was going to win. Like, that's not what 80% means. Right. Like anybody who's played poker and started with pocket aces and got all in against pocket kings, like that's about 80-20. Right. But the 20 does still happen. Yeah. You still lose that hand, and you remember the times you do.
Well, and I think there's two things there. One is I think you're right. I mean, there's just such a misunderstanding of how probability works, both in terms of this stuff and in terms of like, well, oh, that couldn't happen. That dystopia couldn't happen. Right. But also drawing it back to the point, Logan, you were making at the beginning, to me, I think the point isn't even like, oh, our real world isn't as bad as that dystopia, so we shouldn't think about it. It's that in the same way that if you think about yourself with a superpower, like you take yourself and dial it up to 15, it gives you thought. The point of that isn't to say, well, since I don't have the superpower, I'm never going to do the thing. It's to then say, okay, well, I don't have that superpower, but I still have the abilities and powers I have. So what can I actually do in my own world? I think dystopias do the same thing, as it allows us to say, if the Hunger Games represents the problems with like the way we treat each other taken to an extreme, what does that actually tell us about still the way we're treating each other now? You know, and like that's what I think I really love the dystopia is, even if we acknowledge that, like, I don't think we're ever going to get as bad as it is in the Hunger Games or in V for Vendetta. I hope not. But even like the point is, it doesn't have to get that bad.
If we do, we probably won't all survive to that
Well,
point.
yeah, no, the guys in the wheelchairs are going first. So goodbye, everybody. But okay, no, we actually that's no.
Haven't you watched The Walking Dead? Never mind.
There's a lot of people who are going to go before me, probably. But the point being that, like, just because there are things that these dystopian stories can tell us about how bad things could get, that should hopefully make us stop and say, just the fact that could even possibly be on that path now is a good chance to stop now and say, how can we change it?
Yeah, one of the reasons that I was so hard on the pollsters is not, though I totally agree with the lack of understanding of probability thing. It's the reason that I thought the pollsters were nonsensical is because first of all, I'm a black person, so I don't underestimate just the possibility of electing a demagogue who is talking about racial stuff that this country was built on, and the fact that people will either be 100% for it or they will ignore it, right? So there's a lot, and also the secret vote, right? Right. The only thing really, not the only thing, I mean, let me not be completely reductionist, but one of the main things that the civil rights movement was able to accomplish was it made racism something to be ashamed of, or like at least not to say in public, which people think that's just lip service, but I don't, because the idea is that kids grow up thinking that it's no longer okay, which is exactly what you need for society to advance. But anyway, there's just a lot of things that they weren't looking at, and there's no way to quantify the idea that someone isn't going to tell you the truth, especially when you're talking about something like voting for a person who is being reviled by the intelligentsia and by the elites of either side, both saying this person is unqualified, they're a moron, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. No one is really going to vote for that guy. Of course not. And I was literally saying to people, just remember Brexit just happened. Yeah. So, when people get in that voting booth and there's nobody watching them, they're going to slam that Trump button and they're going to giggle about it internally. And there's a lot of people who will do that. Everyone from the racists to the people who are just like, I can't do any more of the same because I'm already about to starve, and people who are just like, well, let's see what happens. Everyone from the anarchist to the racist had a shot at voting for Trump. And then you also have the fact that half of the people who are eligible to vote didn't even vote because they were that unenthused by the two people who were put up. So there's a lot of reasons that, and as a black person in this country, it's already kind of terrifying to walk down the street. Like if I see a group of 5 cops standing somewhere, my blood pressure spikes. Yep. Right. And that's now. That's not like, and that's in Obama's America. Right. You can't call it Trump America. It's just America. America is a more terrifying place for a lot of people than anyone's willing to acknowledge.
Yeah, I think the sort of the Trump effect, as I've seen some people call it, is more like a lot of things. I think it's more of a exacerbation of a pre-existing condition, problem.
Exactly.
It's like, it's not like it's creating a new problem. What it's doing is it's taking something that was already a problem and just throwing fuel onto that fire. Have you seen that in New York? There was apparently some cop outside of Trump Tower wearing I think at night, wearing sunglasses and a balaclava, like a face mask.
Really?
Oh man, yeah. This is yeah.
And so then
this is something that they're pushing forward.
Yeah, I'm watching V for Vendetta, and I'm like, this doesn't even look like scary in a like, oh, what if that happened way.
Yeah.
It's like that fucking shit today, like,
it's about to be bad, especially if they put. If we get Giuliani as AG, you're looking at, police they're going to be able to hide their identities. They're going to be a faceless, like monolithic, basically source of terror. Right. And it's going to be across the country, and that's going to be the law of the land. And it already has sort of subtly been the law of the land for black men and black women especially. But the fact that it's on the books, and that things can go that way, and that, that basically white America didn't do enough to stop that from happening. Well, sorry, now you're going to get a taste. And part of me is kind of like, it sucks that you're going to get a taste. But the other part of me is like, I've been protesting for years. We've been in the streets. I've been boycotting. I've been doing the work, welcome. Thanks.
Well,
join the party. Let's do this.
And I think that phrase, let's get a taste, is actually so perfect, because as we're talking, I'm thinking more about some of these dystopian stories that I love. I think what happens in a lot of them is the author basically says, let's take what's happening to one small minority and that is horrible, but that the people in power aren't paying attention to, and say, what would actually happen if that happened to a lot more people? That's,
exactly.
I think V for Vendetta, the book of which, and I think the movie does this somewhat too, but in the book, I know it's a very intentional way of saying, let's take the things that Thatcher is doing to, the immigrant populations, to the workers who they're, in the anti-union busting, and now expand it to everybody else. Because I think, Logan, you're exactly right. One of the problems is that the things that people are the things that are happening to people like you or to other folks who are experiencing this, just so many people are able to close their eyes to. And that's what I love about these stories. And I want us to dive further into V for Vendetta specifically, but Paul, I wanted to ask you one thing specifically about your what you're saying about how generally you don't like dystopias.
Right.
Would it be fair to call Gotham not necessarily the show, but like the city of Gotham a dystopia, in that it is definitely a place where like crime and political corruption are a lot worse than when they were written, the real world has caught up to Gotham in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
But like, do you think in some ways, like, is the Batman story a little bit dystopian?
Yeah, and like, here's the thing though, like, you have Batman,
Yeah.
Like, Batman's there, and like, the thing about V for Vendetta that I love is that you have V and Evie and I already forgot the cop's name, who, like, I prefer dystopian stories where things work out well.
Okay.
And so when something's a movie or it's, a comic book setting where you kind of know, like, yeah, Batman's got it. Comparing that to like the Hunger Games or I don't know, all the Mad Max things, or there are, I guess to me what it is I really don't like fiction that feels like it's without hope.
I can see that.
And I feel like when you have a dystopian story, you kind of have two choices, right? You can either have a dystopian story with hope, where you have likable characters who sometimes end up okay, or you can have a dystopian story that's basically lacking in hope, where either sometimes you have no likable characters, or sometimes you have likable characters and they just all die, or horrible things happen.
Right.
And I would use Children of Men as an example that I think perfectly sort of illustrates Logan and my feelings. Like yesterday, Logan, like you were saying that's one of your favorite movies.
By
and
far.
I just couldn't. I was just like, I wish I didn't watch this movie.
Yeah.
Because every single time you're introduced, I mean, spoiler alert.
Right.
Spoilers for Children of Men. Every time, like, it's like, oh, I like this character. Nah. Like,
they die.
Yeah, I mean,
True,
and
but the movie does have a happy ending, sort of.
It does, sort of.
It ends with hope, which is...
It does end with a little hope.
The reason that, like, for me, it all comes out in the end, because what that does is it underlines the fact that it's not going to be easy, and it's not going to have, like, the classical storybook Hollywood ending where all the good characters live. You know what I mean? Right. Where it's like, it's definitely more likely that you're going to lose some people along the way, but you are going to make it, in the end of Children of Men, it's like humanity is going to make it, and that the boat does come, it's not just a fairy tale. It's like, yes, there is hope there, and it's hard fought, but it's a possible victory.
If it didn't, that would have been like
that would have been.
Then we have Game of Thrones. Like, that's the like to me.
Well, except Game of Thrones, like, which I can't watch because I feel so dystopian fantasy, I guess, to me. Like, I feel like there's a reasonable chance it actually, I mean, you're gonna, you lose a lot of people along the way, but like, I don't know. They might pull it out. Although half the time I'm just rooting for the White Walkers. But,
Right? Seriously.
What? So let's dive. Let's dive in. Let's dive a little deeper into V for Vendetta, because I think to me, I'll say just to start, and we're going to do huge spoilers for the movie and the TV show the movie and the comic book V for Vendetta. And I don't know what else we're going to talk about, but I should say from the beginning, we're probably going to have big spoilers for the TV show Daredevil, because it connects in a lot of ways around the issue of violence. But I'd say for me...
Can I just ask a quick question?
Sure.
Have you guys read the graphic novel for V for Vendetta, the original source material?
Not for years.
I
not
did
well
many
enough
years
to
ago, and I've read a lot of commentaries by people, like political scientists, about the Thatcher era talking about it.
But so you both actually read it. I haven't even read it. But so as we often are, we're talking more about the movie than the original source material.
Yeah, I think most of the discussion, to me, it's important to know that it was written during the time of Thatcher. But I think we're going to be talking mostly about the movie. But for me, I would say, to start out, one of the things that I love most about the movie is that I think it portrays it's sort of an interesting twist on this idea of hope, because, by the end of the movie, V is kind of a Batman figure. And on the one hand, he has like saved Evie, and he's saved some other good people and killed the bad guys. And there's the hope that he's created of, the new world that he's trying to create, but he's not going to be a part of that new world. And I'm kind of curious, what is your guys' thoughts on, to kind of dive right to the end, on the way he sets up the new world he's trying to like help them move towards?
Well, it's a little bit hard to stand behind everything that he does. I mean, he does some pretty monstrous things to Evie.
Yep. Absolutely.
But, and some monstrous things in general. But I think that I'm just going to go ahead and say that as a society, we do a terrible job of protecting each other. And one of the reasons is because we completely vilify the notion of violence and make that like that's our red. That's when everybody calls it, oh, there's violence. Oh, my goodness. So the idea that if you see someone on the street who is assaulting or raping someone, I personally would risk going to jail for assault, for getting that person, subduing them, for physically subduing them. And I feel great about that fact.
Yeah.
It's not, violence does have a place. Working with dogs, you understand that, dogs are way better at being social animals than we are, but it's not, you'll never see a dog doing torture, certainly.
Right.
But when something's going wrong, they'll throw a quick bite and, or they'll bark really loudly, or they'll snarl, or they'll do something which is like, no, this is not okay. And you got to respond to this. And the whole idea that, we have to treat all violence as equal is absolute nonsense. The violence done by police against innocent people is nothing like the violence of a riot. Of course, I don't condone or support riots, but I bloody understand them. Right. You know what I mean? When you get to the point where you have nothing left to do, you're going to do what all there is left to do. And and sometimes we have to, as people who think of ourselves as good people, we have to allow that space for, and I think that in the case of a dystopia like V for Vendetta, they had reached the point where that was what it took. So some of the things that he did were necessary, but I think the thing that's interesting about the character is that he's bonkers. He's like, right. He's to take it to like Vampire the Mask. He's a Malkavian. He's nuts. He's a genius, but he also is off the deep end, right? So, he's a little bit broken in the brain, and that's what caused some of his missteps. But as I think, I wish he could have survived, but even he thought that he deserved to not survive. Which I think is also interesting.
Yeah, I think you're right. And there's a couple directions I want to go with there. And just the first being, I think, and Paul and I, you've talked about this a little before, but we can go deeper. And Logan, I'd love to hear your thoughts. It feels like, there's two different things he's using violence for. One is to like try and help others and to try to stop this bad stuff and to like make the world better, both on an individual level, like to literally stop Evie getting raped at one point, but also to take down the people who are harming the whole country. but also because he was fucked over and he wants revenge. I mean, like
Yes.
the V for Vendetta, I think, is really important as a title. And I think there's something so interesting to me about the way he's blending the use of violence for these sort of larger societal gains, but also the element of, like, people have harmed me and I need to harm them.
Yeah. I mean, I guess there is so the Lord works in mysterious ways, right? Like, you have to get somebody to the point where they will take action, and someone who is hurt people, right? It's true. So you do have to have somebody who has experienced some serious stuff, which is one of the reasons that I think that, for example, that the civil rights movement was led by Black people, even though, like, once the message was out there, lots of other people got on board, but it took people who were suffering daily to kind of bring the message of, and the original civil rights movement, even, both Martin Luther King and Malcolm X at the end of his life, they were both like, the goal is actually love and unity, right? But we are talking about this because of the pain that we have suffered. And that's kind of how it happens. The wounded healer is the best educator. Because you also have, characters like V who would just become broken and just become villains, right? The mechanism for creating a hero and a villain are pretty similar. It's just the choice that is made by the individual, right? You can have all this awful stuff happen to you and say, this will never happen to anyone again. Or you can say, this awful stuff has happened to me and I'm about to give it out to everyone else. And so, I think it is maybe necessary to have a hero who has suffered a lot because they have the drive. That's the only thing that's realistic.
Well, and I think you're right. That realism to me I think it's one of the things I love most about this movie, because I mean, I'm definitely, I'll admit, even when I hear you talking about, like, the need for violence, part of me bristles, because I'm definitely much more on the nonviolent side for the most part. But,
Certainly.
But I'm somewhat in agreement. Like, I definitely see where you're coming from. But especially what I feel is that idea of, like, being able to really understand where is that drive for violence coming from, and when it and because I think what scares me the most is when it's not self-analyzed. When it's not, you're not being able to recognize, like, and this kind of gets to, I think, the stuff we've talked about with Daredevil a lot. To me, there is such a difference between violence for defense, like, a person is in danger, I am in danger, other people are in danger, versus violence to hurt or to punish. And, like, in Daredevil, I think one of the things that frustrates me the most is he starts with this wonderful idea of, I will not kill. And, like, in season 2 with the Punisher, he won't kill a person in cold blood even though they're a terrible person. But then saying, I won't kill a person in cold blood is equated with, I won't use lethal force as self-defense. And I think that Logan, tell me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, or even to defend another person necessarily.
Right, exactly. And it seems crazy to me to conflate those two.
It absolutely is. I mean, the way I put it is, murder neutrality is what I like in my heroes, where it's the goal is never to kill someone. You're not trying to, the thing that's fun for you is not killing or hurting people, but you do what needs to be done in the situation to deal with the problem that's facing you.
Right.
And sometimes it's gonna have to be to kill someone, and that's not good. We hope that it never comes to that. That's never what we're looking for. But if that is what happens and what objectively looking at the situation needs to be done, you got to do it and go about your business and actually not feel particularly bad about the fact that you had to do that thing, because for me, it's all about objectivity and about responding to the situation in front of you.
Right. Well, and I think really key, especially what you said, is that it certainly doesn't start from a, like, wanting to kill the person, because I think that to me, again, going with Daredevil, one of the most affecting moments of that entire show for me is where he's talking to his priest, and he basically admits that his problem isn't that he thinks that he's going to have to kill and he doesn't want to. It's that he's afraid that he's going to want to kill. He's recognizing that even in himself, there's a part of him that might enjoy, like, there is a sort of visceral, Paul and I talked about this in an earlier episode about Desperado. There's a visceral thrill we get about the idea of a bad guy being horribly killed.
Absolutely.
And it can be fun entertainment, But I think what Daredevil is saying, and I think you're right, maybe V allows himself to enjoy, and that's part of his problem, is that, like, this is a really bad person, so I'm going to enjoy killing them.
Right. And I don't think that's necessary. But I'm not as afraid of that idea as some people are.
That's fair.
It's like, taking Taekwondo and, like, learning to hit people. Like, sometimes it's fun to hit people,
It's
like
fun.
it's not like, and that's the kind of thing that people might freak out about, but it's true. We're physical animals. We're animals. We are. It's all about the circumstance, right? The only difference between assault and, I don't know, an excellent sexual experience is whether everybody involved is consenting to that situation, right? So it's not as if, there's no reason to look at violence dogmatically. I don't think ever, right?
Yeah.
It's all about what we're literally facing.
I had an ethics professor, and I think this is a pretty common sort of ethics 101 example, but she loved to use the example of, if I say to you that I'm going to take a knife and cut you open, is that a bad thing? And everyone, of course, said, well, of course that is. And she said, well, what if I'm a surgeon taking out a ruptured appendix?
Right.
Yeah.
And it's the idea of that, like, any physical, like,
Or taking out a bullet or whatever.
Yeah. Or even I'm a tattoo.
Or you're like, please kill me, I'm suffering.
Yeah, or even, or it's ritual scarification. The idea being that, like, any physical act, the idea that any physical act can be either good or bad absent context makes no sense. It is the context that's what's important.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I'll add, pretty much agreeing with Logan's point, where I don't particularly care whether or not the, I guess, hero or protagonist or whatever in this case does enjoy what they're doing. Like, when Dexter kills, like, a pedophile, like, I'm not like, oh no, but he's enjoying it,
Right.
Or when he kills someone who's killed, who's a serial killer, I'm not like, oh, it sucked, it's terrible that he likes this. Like, I don't know, I know people who have this physical kind of, like, reaction. I don't know, maybe I would be a serial killer in another life. I might write some serial killer fiction, whatever, but, like, but it's like, if he kills someone who I think the world would be a better place without, like, okay, like, there's other ways, but he lives in a world where apparently they've beaten the justice system,
Well, I guess
Right.
here's the thing, and I actually think Dexter explores this in some good ways. To me, it's not that I think that just on its face there's a problem if the person enjoys it.
Right.
I think the problem is if the person is also deciding when is killing necessary. The fact that they enjoy killing, and actually in Dexter's case wants to kill, I think the danger is that sometimes that means they're going to be a little bit overeager to decide that someone needs to be killed.
Absolutely.
That's a good point.
And maybe that happens once or twice in this show.
Yeah, I mean, Dexter, I think
I mean, spoiler alert, it does.
Yeah.
Like, where he's like, oh, well, I'm not 100%, but like 99%. He's like, yeah, I'm going to kill this guy. Yeah. Oh, that wasn't the guy. Oh, my bad. And then he, like, kind of, like, feels bad about it, but he doesn't really feel bad about it,
I mean, I'm trying to imagine, I don't know what
that
this would
was
look
an
like,
error.
but, like, some kind of a show about a Dexter-type person where you basically have two people on a team. Or maybe it's a couple, like, there's a couple of people who are, like, the people who hate the fact that this is necessary, but that they sort of coldly assemble all the evidence, and they say, all right, we hate that we have to do this, but Dexter, here's the guy, he's the pedophile, you should go kill him. And then Dexter's like, awesome, let's go. Like, that I could be a lot more okay with. It's that idea of that the person killing is also, if they're enjoying it and they're also deciding. That's
right. So you have a judge and an executioner are two separate people, basically.
Right.
That's the reason that I would never support the death penalty in pretty much any society that has ever been created.
Yep.
Is because you can't trust the system which has made the judgment.
Yeah.
Right.
So it's like, it's not about. I'm just agreeing with you guys on that one. Yeah.
Yeah, totally.
I also just wanted to throw in something on the, like, hitting someone and it feeling good. Like, when we, like, wear chest guards and we kick each other in the chest guards and, like, we wear headgear or we don't and we kick each other in the head and, like, it's not, like, causing an injury. It's just like, bat, bat, bat. It's like, like, or even when maybe someone's trying to punch me and then I'm trying to kick them and they punch me in the shin and break their hand. Like maybe there's a little bit of like a
Yeah. Well, and I can even give an
you know
example.
that one, right?
I can give an example.
Wait.
Oh, go ahead.
I have like I'm going somewhere with this.
Sure.
There's a satisfying feeling there, you know.
Oh, yeah.
Particularly like if you hit someone with the top of your foot, which actually doesn't cause that much pain or whatever, but it makes this really big sound.
Yeah.
It's like there's like a yeah, you know. But there was this guy who went to the Taekwondo school that I went to, and we were both black belts, and he had at one point followed this woman home, this student who was a white belt, a new student, and she was like, it's like, oh, can I help you get home? And she's like, no, I'm good, thanks. And he's like, well, let me help you. And so he basically just like stalked her home.
Right.
And then she went home and nothing happened, but like, it was like super creep, So like, yeah. And so, and the way he talked to a lot of people, it was just really, he was really creepy in that way. And a lot of the women like really felt, like threatened by him, and understandably so. And then he'd done one or two things that like really bothered me on a like as a teacher sort of thing.
Uh-huh.
And then he'd also been in some car accident with a friend who he then apparently left out in the street or in the car or whatever. And then the emergency people came and got him, and the guy was like in a coma for like 6 months. And finally, I think was okay, but I don't know. And that guy was also a student who I knew. And so, everybody kind of like wanted to get him, So one day on a test, I was fighting him, and I was just like, I'm just going to hit him so hard, And he threw this kind of like weak little bullshit back kick that doesn't do anything. So I just kind of slid around it and just turning kick and like rear leg kick just right to the face.
Uh-huh.
And he just like doubled over, and there's just like blood, and there like the immediate feeling of like just the technique of it was like that was like this like perfect achievement of like, oh man,
right.
Like I really got to just like unload on someone like right in the face with my foot, like. And, yeah, I know that sounded really dirty. But
Taekwondo,
but then,
we're talking Taekwondo.
Taekwondo. But then right after that, I just had this feeling of like empathy and like, what have I done? And it felt horrible to like really hurt someone that much. Like he was basically like knocked out on his feet,
Right.
And like there was this really weird couple of emotions of like, yeah, I did that, and like screw that guy, but then also like just this like horror. And I don't know. I mean, I imagine a lot of people feel something like that, like sometimes maybe both of those things are there when. I mean, there is something
person
that
is healthy. I would hope that both of those things would be there. Yes.
Yeah. And, I mean, because I do think that it's very natural to have this sort of desire for vengeance, and that there is something that can be very satisfying about violence against people who you think have wronged other people.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
But then there's also something that like, that's still a person, and actually physically hurting that person also feels bad.
Well,
so.
There's two things that brings up for me. One is that as you're telling that story, I mean, I'm not a martial artist. I don't have any kind of that physical ability, but I've seen a version of this happen a lot online, frankly, which is like when I see someone else, and even when I've done this a couple times, post a really scathing, insulting response to someone we disagree with online,
Right.
Like there is that moment of that kind of like, I've just done a perfect intellectual, back kick, like I have torn that person down, and it feels great. And like, we share those memes on Facebook and on Twitter and all, about like, look at Samantha Bee, take this person down one, and it's satisfying and it's visceral.
Right.
Yeah.
But it's that same idea of like, when it is about just like humiliating someone else. I don't think it is by any means the same, but I think there's the same kind of thought process on both sides. But the other larger point is, and I think this really feeds into both dystopians, but also the problem in our real world is, like, as I'm hearing that story from you, Paul, what I'm hearing is the biggest problem there is that you are feeling the reason why it feels good for you to do that is because the system isn't doing what it's supposed to be doing. Like, if I feel, Logan, I think you said before, like, if you were walking down the street and you saw someone being attacked, like, you'd be willing to like jump in and risk your body to stop it and to use your body to stop it. And I think that's commendable. And I think that in that same way, you might feel satisfied if you wound up hurting that person who was doing the bad thing. But a part of what's underlying all of that is we're supposed to have a sort of an official system of cops, sort of justice that does it for us that isn't there, And I think it's what Daredevil wrestles with all the time. It's what Batman wrestles with all the time is the world isn't supposed to need someone like me to do this. We're supposed to have a system in place. And the thing
I actually don't think I agree with that.
Yeah,
okay.
Me too.
Well, I want to hear what you're saying.
But
yeah, my only point being that kind of like in these stories, like what we have is like what happens when that system isn't there. But no, tell me where you disagree.
Well, my disagreement comes from the fact that, so the way that the modern policing model is a direct descendant of slave patrols. There has never been, unless you're talking about a military occupation or something like that, or where you are, looking out over a recently subjugated community. The idea back in the day was, you have a sheriff, right? Who is basically, that would be the person who knew how to fight the best. They had a good arsenal and they had the jail, right? But they would not be just walking around looking for crime. And most of the time people would be like, for me, the Second Amendment is about the the very deeply human and inalienable right to protect oneself from a threat, right? So if people, were doing a better job of protecting each other, there would be no need for policing because you could just be like, help, if you were a person who couldn't defend yourself, and people in your community would be like, what's going on? Let's do this, right? So the power has been taken away from people to defend each other in some ways by the idea of policing, especially since, like I said, if you step in, you're afraid that litigation will come against you because of the way that society works now. So the lack of justice is deeper than just that. And I think it is very unjust that we are not expected to protect each other. And instead we have to wait for somebody who's not on the scene or anywhere nearby to supposedly come in and, because the police are the Batman. They're supposed to be the Batman in our world, right?
Right. They're not supposed to be the ever-present presence.
Exactly.
Well, and I hear you. Go ahead, Paul, and I want to respond to that go ahead.
Yeah, well, so one is that there was recently a story, the headline of which is all that I read, so I can't really speak to the details, but apparently there was a dude on a bus who saw someone trying to rape someone else and then stopped them and then got arrested. Right. Like,
yes, that very recently that happened, like a week or so.
Yeah, and I mean, of course he was black, and like that, and if he wasn't, like, reasonable chance that the cops wouldn't have arrested him, Right. Maybe they would have. I don't know. And similarly, there was a woman who got grabbed by some group of Trump supporters. This one guy grabs her and is yelling at her, saying like, "Go back to your country," blah blah blah. She's like, "I'm a citizen here, and you better let go of my wrist, or one of us is going to be injured, and it's not going to be me." Right. And then he didn't, and then she hurt him, and then the cops handcuffed her, like, and so yeah, that right to defend yourself, basically, I think is sort of infringed upon in a lot of ways, right. And maybe not sort of, but then on top of that, there was a second thought that I seem to have completely lost the train of.
Well, let me jump in then, because
you talk,
because I think I definitely hear where you're both coming from, and I would often say that when I say like the system as it's supposed to work, I realize that like the just political system is kind of like a unicorn. Like, I don't think it has ever existed by any means. And I'm talking a little bit about something to work towards not like let's go back to the good old days by any means.
Right.
But I guess here's my fear is that for every time you have a story like that of someone who is defending themselves or someone who should, I guess to me what I'm saying is under your system, isn't George Zimmerman just as okay for having killed Trayvon Martin as self-defense? Or like that guy who however many stories you hear about people who see, kids on their lawn or black kids, playing with toy guns and shoot them. I guess to me that I get really scared at that. Because to me, I get really scared at that idea of, in some ways, it's the Civil War idea of like Captain America, Team Tony. Like any system of accountability is going to be so broken and so horrible. I'll absolutely admit that. But isn't there some kind of a need to have some kind of accountability rather than just if you feel like you need to defend yourself, you have that inalienable right to defend yourself?
Right. Okay. So that is the idea that George Zimmerman did anything but act like a coward and a criminal is nonsense, right?
Oh, completely agree with you. I'm not saying he did.
I know you're not. I'm just putting that out there.
Totally.
Because yeah, we're talking about a world that doesn't exist and probably has never.
Yep.
But, the idea, we also have to talk about like what's really reasonable here, right?
Right.
Because Trayvon Martin didn't do anything.
Yep.
Right. So if he had been walking around actually waving a gun around or screaming in the night, I'm about to kill people in this neighborhood, then yes.
Right.
Then and actually, yes, I would say what you're supposed to do is confront that person. That's why people are allowed to have guns. You're not basically if something's going to happen, it's going to happen pretty quick, right?
Oh, yeah.
It's going to happen before anyone could get there anyway, really. So, you should be able to defend yourself. But the problem is that, blackness itself is viewed as a weapon.
Yep.
Pretty much literally.
Oh, yeah.
So, and as a threat.
Yeah. I mean, in the way that the world is set up now, for like way too many reasons to get into, like, it's not just, and usually the people that will act on and people that will act on that sort of protection thing are doing it for the wrong reasons.
Sure.
They have been empowered, and people who are doing it for the right reasons have been disempowered.
Yeah, and that's actually what my other thought was that people collectively don't necessarily know who the real threats are, or who is, how to distinguish, this person is actually threatening something, some form of violence or to do something.
Right.
And they just use that idea as an excuse to do violence to that person. And they say later, oh, well, he had something in his pocket. Skittles, whatever. Those could be poisonous Muslim terrorists.
Right.
I don't know.
Right.
I'm mixing my metaphors, but I think we can all agree Skittles bad. Anyway, or dangerous, or no, good. Skittles good? I don't know.
Yeah. We'll avoid the great sugar conspiracies, but yeah. Well,
there's that.
But no, and I definitely hear that, and I guess, this is a point that could make it entire its own show. So let me just make this one last thing, and hear your response, then we can move on. Because I think I totally hear that, but I guess to me the reason why there should still be some kind of a system of saying like some authority that is deciding what is or is not okay use of that kind of force is that, I mean, obviously it failed dramatically in the case of Trayvon Martin and in all of these cases, but that without that, who is there to decide that one act of self-defense was okay, but that George Zimmerman wasn't a legitimate act of self-defense? Like, I know it wasn't, you know it wasn't, we all know it wasn't, but obviously our court system doesn't know that. He got to go free. Right. And so
we need a better court system.
Well, but that's what it is. I would say we need a better court system, and maybe I'm misunderstanding you guys. My understanding is that you guys are saying get rid of that entire court system and just let everyone do what they think they need to.
No.
That's what I thought you were going for.
Yeah.
So
I would say change the policing system. Fix the court system.
Right.
Yeah. Because there always should be some system of justice that gets to adjudicate things outside of the immediate actors. There always should be, but it has to be just. It's in the name.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Right.
It's like
it's not the just ICE system. Like
justice is blind is kind of a weird way to frame it. It shouldn't be blind.
Yeah.
It should be impartial. It should not be.
Right.
It should be not only not blind, but extremely far and wide seeing. It should be the most clear seeing instrument that we have to
Right.
discern
Right.
what's actually going on.
What's that
Like
idea of
justice
context?
is omniscient, not blind.
Yeah, it's the idea of context we talked about before, that you have to know the reason behind an action, not just judge an action.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Then we're a lot closer to where I thought we were. So let me go back to V for Vendetta then and ask about what is because Logan, I love the way you described like his use of violence and there being some real value to it. And to me, and I'm wondering where you guys see it, it's my interpretation of the ending of the movie, where he has used violence to kill the people who have like done all these terrible things, but then the act that sort of takes down the government is a completely nonviolent one. Is all the people all those people in the V masks don't beat up the soldiers.
Right.
They march completely nonviolently towards the soldiers, and the soldiers eventually decide not to fire because they have no orders. And so I'm wondering, what's your take on that, and sort of the way it juxtaposes that act of nonviolence with the violence of V, and how that ties together?
I think that's perfect. I think that's actually the leaders are supposed to be catalysts. And, for me, the goal, I think I said something to this effect earlier. The goal is always love and unity. That's always, always the goal. But especially, depending on your villain, depending on your enemy, you can't take peaceful means to achieve that goal at all times, right? So I think that is exactly the way that movie should have ended, right? It would have been maybe better if it had been a little better if it had been, instead of a lack of orders, like they had just decided like we can't shoot all these people.
Right.
Right.
If those soldiers had refused an order.
Exactly. That would have been, I think, the perfect culmination. But the way that it worked out, I think, was an excellent, excellent way to cap it off, because, it was a wave of peaceful people washing over a militarized response without a single weapon. And that is what we need right now.
Yeah.
That's definitely what we need right now. And that militarized response is it's a fear of people in charge, whether they are fascists or neoliberals or, and I think neoliberals and fascists are not that different when you get right down to it. But anyway, that's a different topic.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not sure whether I think that would have been better or not, but I think that the way it worked out was that you've got basically three possible kind of situations of violence, right? You can have violent conflict, which is violence versus violence. You can have peace, which is an absence of violence, or you can have oppression, which is nonviolence on one side due to threat of violence on the other, or actual violence on the other, right? And so what we start with in V is oppression, where there's a violent government that is threatening violence to anybody who is not already doing violence to. And so the people are nonviolent because they're afraid of losing a conflict, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then V's like, no, we're going to do violence. We're going to do violence versus violence. And so using his violence, he destroys some of their symbols, right? As a way of motivating the people to take, their own nonviolent action. But he also destroys the people who are directly directing the violence of the government.
Right.
And so then at the end, now you have peace, because he's basically chopped the heads off the Hydra or the dragon or whatever. And so now, or the snake, I don't know, whatever.
It's not
he chops
Hydra,
some heads off.
different model, but
yeah. But there's a bunch of them. So, anyway, maybe the Etten.
And I think a key point there is that it's that he's removed the fear.
Exactly. Yeah, and he's removed the fear not just from the people, but also from the soldiers who are like just following orders or whatever.
Right.
Which, at some point, like, they don't all necessarily think like, this is a good thing we're doing. Many of them are probably thinking, well, this is my job and I maybe don't agree with it, but I'm not supposed to question orders. But then when they stop getting orders to be oppressive, they're like, well, okay, nobody's pushing down on me to push down on these people. And these people clearly have a plan, and there's tons of them. So, like, all right, have at it.
Well, and I would actually even say, and this is never really explored much, but I think it's a little implied, I would actually say even something a little bit more in praise of those soldiers, because I think to know that you are the support of an oppressive system, and now to see the people who have for all this time been afraid of you marching at you without fear is a little bit terrifying. And I think one thing that's important is that, and I think this is absolutely part of what we're seeing with police in America right now. Part of what is happening is people who are used to having this domineering power don't have as much of that power anymore, and they're afraid and they're lashing out in that fear, and that's some of the most horrible things we're seeing. And I think that's one more, like, to me, I never thought about it until this moment, but the fact that those police don't show fear, that they're able to just like let the people wash over them and let it happen, is one more kind of awesome sign of that.
Right, that they just stand down. They don't, you know.
Yeah.
Or they don't just freak out and do it anyway. Yeah, that's true.
Well, and so
it's sort of like
go ahead.
Oh, I just want to say it's sort of like the opposite of that photo of that woman in the dress in where was it? I feel like it was somewhere in the south, Baton Rouge maybe. There were protests and there's this woman just standing there.
Such a beautiful picture.
Yeah, it is. And there's this line of heavily armed and armored cops, and then these two cops like running up to her, like what are they like they look so afraid, you know?
Oh yeah.
And like she's just like, here I am, you know, and that's sort of, I mean, I don't know. I wish all those cops were a little bit more like the ones in V for Vendetta, but.
I mean, they do get educated on fear. I mean, to be honest, I just had a situation the other day where I was walking by. I'll give the short version of the story. I was walking down the street on my way to another dog, and I saw a woman lying in the street with a dog. She had been hit by a car, like clearly pretty badly because one of her shoes was off. And she had a dog, pretty large pit bull type dog in a muzzle, who was, guarding her. And there were like 7 cops and 3, FDNY emergency services personnel, but no one was going anywhere near them. And I walked up to one of the policemen and I was like, hey, I work with dogs every day. Like, this is what I do for a living. Like, let me just go get the dog. And they were like, no, you can't. And the reason they said no, I get why they said no, because, obviously the rules say you can't let citizens get in the way, and they're afraid of this dog doing something, but it's all about them being afraid of things, right? It's all about them. They're afraid of being, sued. They're afraid of the dog doing something to them. They're afraid of what I'm going to do if something happens to me, right? And that's all just fear, rather than being like, okay, let's just help this woman, right? So she laid there much longer than she should have or needed to because of their fear. Right. Yep. So I think for me, I have a lot of, though I have extreme disdain for the idea of for modern policing and for, when people say FTP, like I get it. Right. But each individual officer, I'm like, whatever happened in your life, it's led you to think that this was the best shot you have at a life. Right. And unfortunately, the way things are now, that's all about you being afraid of stuff. And you're a person who's afraid, who's wearing essentially a superhero costume. You got great boots, you got thick clothing, you got a belt with all kinds of tools and utilities and weapons. And still you're afraid of other people. And that's not only nonsense, but it's not only potentially deadly, but literally deadly, right? That fear, we have to remove the fear from police as well. We have to remove the police's fear of the people and vice versa, because we're all the people.
I mean, it's only lightly explored, but I think, and I've commented this before, one of my favorite stories, like a story arc that's played out in a lot of the Marvel movies, is Tony Stark's fear. And how, like, Tony Stark's basically PTSD, for all intents and purposes, I mean, I don't think they've ever officially diagnosed him, but it certainly seems like that. His fear, leads to Ultron and then leads to his actions in Civil War, And I think that he's kind of a hyper version, but Logan, of exactly what you're talking about, of how much the combination of fear and power and how linked they are. Like, if part of why you've always believed you don't have to be afraid is like, I have this power, so I don't have to be afraid. And now your people are starting to question if your power can actually do things. Like, your first thing you want to do is to show your power, is to show that you have this gun and it can still have things. And that's just so disastrous.
Yep. See also election of Trump. See also Brexit.
Yep. Yep. And see all of these things.
There's a quote from V that I think is relevant in a odd way. right in the beginning. People shouldn't be afraid of their government. Governments should be afraid of their people.
Definitely.
But I mean, I definitely believe people shouldn't be afraid of their government, and I do think governments should be accountable to their people.
Yeah,
but
that's a good way of putting it.
You know, but officers of the government being literally afraid of the people is actually a very big problem for the people.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
Because when a heavily armed person is afraid, they do stupid things.
I mean, there's been all this talk recently about the Electoral College, created by, I mean, I'm a huge fan of the Alexander Hamilton musical, and I love a lot of it, but he did create the Electoral College, among other things. And if you read his writings about why the Electoral College was put into place, it was because they were so afraid of, populist movements. And given what a populist movement just did using the Electoral College, you understand that fear. But,
but it was also created to protect the rights of the southern states that were less populous so that they could maintain slavery.
Right?
Yeah,
exactly.
That's also a thing.
And to prevent the poor, let the educated folk have the vote only.
Right.
Right.
And let's use that actually to jump into what I think is one of the most controversial parts of V for Vendetta. That's kind of one of our last things. We need to wrap up pretty soon. But is, what V does is he helps people overcome fear in a lot of great ways. And one of the major plot things is that he uses both mental and I would say physical violence against Evie in a way to break her of her fear. And does some pretty horrible things to her in the process. But as a result of which, at least according to the movie, she says that, it broke her of her fear.
Mm-hmm.
How do we feel about what he does? To Evie specifically.
I think it's okay because it worked, but if it didn't work, it would be horrifying. I mean, obviously, if someone was like, oh, I'm going to do this, I'd be like, don't do that.
Right.
And just for anyone who hasn't seen the movie or doesn't remember it, my quick version of it, and tell me if you want to add anything, but is that he basically, without her knowing it's happening, he makes her think that she has been arrested by the police and that they are doing the full mind torture,
slash concentration camp kind of thing, except in solitary.
Right. And he basically makes her relive something very similar to what he went through himself. And his logic is that it broke him of his fear, and so it will break her of her fear.
Yeah, it's one of those things that you could never sign off on. And it's one of those things where it's I'm torn on it, because obviously who can condone psychological torture? But then again, to create a hero, you need a traumatic experience.
Yeah.
Right. So he does do that, and he does it effectively. So it's one of those things where it's I could never say that was the right choice, but it did do exactly the thing that he said it was going to do and that he thought it would do. So, man, I mean, it's just a conflicted and extremely conflicted action by a very conflicting person. Yeah,
I think I'm Paul. I think I'm kind of a little on the opposite of where you are, Paul. That I'm just as conflicted. I think I'm a little more on the he shouldn't have done it, because to me it's still such a. It is one person deciding that torturing someone else is justified for ends that he thinks both people agree with. And even though in this case I agree with the ends and they do work, that just whole idea is so horrific to me. But you are both right. And I guess that's the sort of thing is within the paradigm of the movie, it seems like the right thing to do. It's probably the one place where I most have a problem with the paradigm of the movie, because to me, it just still seems like such a the fact that it's so completely non-consensual, and it's and it's done with almost this error. The fact that there's sort of a hint of romance between the two of them, I think, also really bothers me.
I mean, more than a hint, even.
Yeah, no, actually, you're right.
Absolutely.
I think that adds a level to it that makes it that much worse.
One thing that I would just throw out there is that living in that world is constant psychological torture.
Yep.
And there's basically no such thing as consent in a world like that.
Yeah.
To an extent, I mean, every people's lives are no longer consensual. They're just doing, she goes to the Stephen Fry character's house because that's what she's told to do, basically.
Right.
And that's just that's how that world is so so messed up that that doesn't, I would say that doesn't excuse like any, like, I mean, it's a horrible thing to do to a person,
right?
You know, but like
kind of paternalistic as well.
Yeah.
Kind of, yeah,
kind of, more than kind of.
Totally, and but like, let's just look at what his other options are. Basically, one, let her just get picked up by the government and tortured and killed by them, right. Pick her up himself and then bring her to his place, where the last time he saw her, she ran away from him. Right. And try to get the other guy to like catch him. Right. Or this or some other unthought of thing. So it's not like, well, it's fine, but it's like I do think it's one of those, he's trying to find the least worst option kind of, which
you know, and there are only bad options basically.
Right. And there might have been an option that was also bad and not as bad. Right. But like just being like, okay, you're free to go now, like that would be horrible.
Yeah, also. That would be
be worse. I would
much worse.
But it would be like, well, that's just neutral. Right. You're just letting whatever happen, and that's one of the things that's so frustrating about like media coverage and a lot of like so many things in our real world is like people taking neutrality for like neutrality. Yeah,
right? There is no such thing as neutrality in a world with this much oppression. There's just no such thing.
Or neutrality is always the support of the status quo, and if the status quo is oppressive, then yeah. Well, and I definitely hear that, and I think there's a lot of truth there, and maybe this is some headcanon on my part, but I think the way I've always seen the movie is, especially because of how kind of heartbroken he is when she leaves after all that, is that to some extent that is part of why he feels like he has to die. Because my interpretation of it, at least, is him kind of recognizing that his feeling like this is what he needed to do to her is a sign of kind of that, like he is just as broken as the world he is trying to end. Mm-hmm. And so in some extent, like he has to use that brokenness to help bring about the new world, but that he can't be part of that new world, you know?
I think that's a very good way to put it, because there would not be any happily ever after with someone who is that psychologically damaged as V is. So it actually does kind of make sense. What you just said, I think, is kind of wraps it up for me.
And Logan, I absolutely know you didn't mean this, and so I'm not. But I wanted to make sure we're not, because I think I said this too. We're not by any means saying like a happy world can't involve very psychologically damaged people by any means.
Of course not. Right.
But it's just about
that's just him in particular.
Yeah.
But it's also that I think
his skill set is no longer going to be quite useful.
Yeah, no, I think what he's saying is that he wants a world where no one will ever do to someone like Evie what he did to her.
Absolutely.
Is that a better way of saying it? Yeah.
Definitely. And I mean, you know, the I guess the Hollywood thing would have been, you know, if she had forgiven him and then they'd gone and lived happily ever after, like that would make her some sort of weird Stockholm syndrome, like
her love could rescue him and make him better.
That would have been a really weird ending. You know?
But it wouldn't be. I mean, in some way, like I was shocked by that ending because
really?
I expected that to be exactly the ending. So I think Logan's right. That's the Hollywood ending.
No, this was the Jesus-y ending. Okay, so here's the thing. Speaking of dystopia, dystopian, you know, movies by the Wachowskis, right? I have a Matrix Revolutions.
Oh dear.
Sort of. I know, right? But so the whole, so spoiler alert for the worst Matrix movie. The whole Neo thing, the one thing, apparently, like, there's this like cycle or whatever where the one is like created as this like sort of complement to everything else in the Matrix, right? And then they get reintroduced into it, and then it starts a new cycle. Yep. Right? So in a way, I think V, I mean, is clearly the one, right? Oh, the 5, I don't know. But
that's funny.
In V for Vendetta, where he basically is taking himself and like reintroducing himself to all the stuff that happened at that Lark Hill facility. He's killing the who was there, and he's destroying the government that was built on that terror.
Yep.
But then he's also destroying himself with that. And so he's kind of removing all of that. Like, he's the part that cancels that out, almost like if I remembered my organic chemistry a little better, this would, but like if you've got just some oxygen bubbles floating around in a bunch of water, it's like he's the hydrogen that then forms with that oxygen, and then all of a sudden you just have water. And it's like, it kind of basically brings back around to a circle, right? Where it's like where they were before is kind of where they are again at the end. And obviously it's a new place, but like everything that had happened he kind of undid it by, in the process though, he like has to go the same way like Neo has to go,
Yeah. No, I like that.
Right. He has to change drastically.
Yeah.
Right.
Basically by dying.
Yeah. Right. Exactly.
I mean, in a way, it connects to something I'd Logan, you were talking before about how really important to the civil rights movement was that it was led by black people. And I think that's been true of a lot of the, any oppressed movement. I think one of the central truths is it has to be led by the people who are oppressed. Because if nothing else, like if people in power give power to the people who don't have power, then you're still keeping the system of the oppressed people only have power because the others gave it to them. A white-led civil rights movement is still about white people deciding what is best for black people. A straight-led LGBT movement is still, that replicates itself in any movement.
That's
Although,
true.
I mean,
I do think that on the ground, this is about white people going in. Like, you got to go get your folks right now. You know what I mean?
To be sure.
Like,
I mean, it's the difference between like. To me, white people shouldn't be the leaders, but they absolutely need to be the troops. You need to do the
yes,
not leading
definitely.
doesn't mean, but it means letting, to me, like I'm a disabled person. I'm going to be the one talking a lot about how, what Trump's going to do can really hurt disabled folks. But I sure as hell, like when I hear an able-bodied friend of mine, like call out someone else for using the word lame, like to me, that's awesome.
Yes.
Like with any of these movements, I think that people can often say, oh, well, they say that black people should lead that movement, so I as a white person don't have to get involved. No, bullshit. That's not what it means at all. It just means you don't get to decide what the movement should be doing.
That goes back to the idea that people need to be better at protecting each other.
Right.
Yeah, and I just want to kind of, like, I think that's the way things are most likely to happen and actually work, but I just totally disagree that that's a necessary way for things to go. And I mean, maybe the history that I would cite actually proves me wrong, but I do think if there's a way for people in power, we can call right now white people, whatever, to irrevocably relinquish that disproportionality of power, I don't think that somehow means that then, like, honestly, I actually think that would be the ideal solution. I think it's maybe the least likely solution, but I think if you have the people in power actually voluntarily, deliberately relinquishing that power and saying, hey, we should all have this power, we should all have an equal voice. And, when you have billionaires giving away the vast majority of their fortunes, I think that actually is better in the long run than if you were to just take that from them.
Oh, to be sure, but but I think maybe
I don't think we could just sit back and hope that happens. And so my historical, precedent sort of would be like the Civil War, where like that was, I mean, I'm not a huge Civil War buff, but, my understanding is that there were uprisings led by like John Brown, freed a bunch of slaves, killed a bunch of people, got hung. And that eventually led to a war between the North and the South, where it certainly wasn't all white people in the North who won that war, but like that, I mean, Lincoln was kind of important to that whole thing, and.
But here's where I would respond, and I know you got to go somewhat soon.
Yeah, I do.
But it's like, because I use a counterexample, but just on that, first of all, I will admit, given the current situation, I'm kind of big on the idea of secession. Because if California wants to declare itself a free state, I'm moving, and I don't want Trump to be Lincoln.
I am moving there.
But more to the point, there's actually a lot of great analysis that says that one of the yes, there was a great movement of white people wanting to end slavery, but that part of why the situation for blacks in the South and in the North continued to be so horrible after the Civil War is because it was white people having their ideas of what was best for the black slaves.
Right.
Exactly.
And
exactly.
To me, a better example for today.
Yeah, that's sort of what I meant about history of my own example might just what I'm saying.
Well, no,
although I don't think it does, but I think it does speak to.
Well, and I would say I think you have a point, and here's the way I would clarify it a bit, clarify my take on this a bit, and then Logan, let me know your thoughts, and then let's wrap up. But to take Paul, you were saying if all white people just decided to give up power, if billionaires decided to give money. To me, if a billionaire were to say, "Look, I really want to help poor people," awesome. If the billionaire says, "I want to give up all of my money to poor people to make their lives better," awesome. If the billionaire then says, "Here's my idea of what I think will be best for poor people, so I'm going to use all my money to do that," to me, that's not as good as if the billionaire tries to find a way to get an idea from the poor people themselves. How can he best use the money to help them?
Exactly.
And that's to me when I talk about the leadership is that the people who are oppressed have to have the primary voice in what is going to actually be what an end of oppression for them looks like.
Mm-hmm. And that's one of the things that I was thinking about while you guys were talking about that. There were many slavery didn't just end because white people decided, yeah, we should let those people. There's just way too much behind. And obviously the slaves themselves were in many ways, great and small, in a constant state of near revolt, right?
Yeah.
So
Haiti is a country that exists because of a slave revolt.
Yes, and Haiti actually is a great example because what happened in Haiti is they got their freedom and then they were punished for it, right? They were not allowed to do self-determination because self-determination means they would have been trading with other people. But people were like, no, well, you know what? You can be free, but we're not going to trade with you and we're going to leave you as poor as you ever were. And the same thing happened with black people in this country. Okay, we're going to give you finger quotes freedom, right? But every time you build something, you got your Black Wall Street in Oklahoma destroyed. You have the Zoot Suit riots. You have every time when
the Harlem Renaissance. Look at Harlem in the 1920s compared to Harlem today.
Yeah, you'll get all these things where it's people also just want to be left alone to be free, right? They just want a chance to live for themselves and determine for themselves. It's keep your money, billionaire. Just leave us the fuck alone, right? And don't let you protect us from your people. So it's not for me. Those examples are not examples of white people taking the lead. Those are they're actually following the lead of people calling for their own freedom, right? And the way that you would help, the way that you would be a soldier in that army is you would make sure that your money was going to the right places and to the right causes. Like you said, Matt, let the oppressed people decide where things go from here and then leave them alone in perpetuity and protect them in perpetuity from other people who would roll back those things.
Totally. I think that's a great point to kind of wrap up on. Do you think you guys want to have any last things to add before we start our goodbyes?
No, I think that does it for me.
So this was an episode about lethal versus non-lethal violence, or
lethal versus non-lethal violence, dystopias. We kind of bounced around on a couple things.
Yeah.
I don't think the three of us ever be able to have a conversation that stuck to one topic, but that's a good thing.
No, that would. I mean, why would we?
It's the fun of podcasting. Well, I want to thank you guys both for being a part of this. This was awesome, and Logan, thank you so much for being a guest. I really hope you're going to be able to be again.
My pleasure.
Logan, tell our audience a little bit more about. I know you're doing writing on a lot of great topics. What you're doing and how people can find more of your work.
Primarily, my number one thing is my business, Urban Dog Care NYC, which is you can find our website at urbandogcarenyc.com. And we're also on Facebook and on Instagram and on Twitter. We have a pretty active, pretty active in the social media world. And that's where I spend most of my time talking about dogs and their relationship to humans and how we need to update the human-dog relationship and take out a lot of the dominance and aggression model that has been in there and actually understand that dogs can teach us a lot about peace and living together well. And we need to restructure those things. Everything about dogs ties in a lot with my thoughts about humans and humanity. I also recently published a book called Putting Paws to Pavement, which you can find at my website. And if you look on Facebook, there's links and there's excerpts as well. You can also find Harlequin's Song currently on Facebook.com/Harlequin's Song. And there's links there where you can actually buy your own copy. And the same for Putting Paws to Pavement. You can find links to that on my website or on Facebook as well. And I hope you'll do so.
Awesome. Yeah, please do, folks. Those are two great books. As Logan says, a lot of, you take a book about dog walking and a book about a dystopian comic book. Pulling the two together seems amazing, but in both, Logan, I think, does a great job of just going really deep into some of the philosophical questions in all this. And personally, I know I love the stuff you write about the social relationships of dogs and how we humans can learn so much about that. So that's awesome stuff.
Thank you.
Paul, any closing stuff from you?
Yes, they're good books. Buy them.
Awesome. What about your own stuff?
Zen Madman, find it, whatever.
Cool.
I'll get back to you on that one.
Sounds good. And again, everybody, I'm Matthew West.
I'm in that though, so
Yeah,
hey.
no, Paul is one of the stars of Harlequin Song, so a martial
or
artist.
supporting actor, but
It's the first time I saw
I
you
go as far
wearing
as to say one of
white,
the stars.
so that was kind of happy for me.
Co-stars.
Oh,
right.
Yeah, and again, I'm Matthew Westfox, the sort of host and founder of Superhero Ethics. You can check us out at superheroethics.com. You can also find us on Twitter or on Facebook at Superhero Ethics. Obviously, we've dived into some really deep issues, and as you can tell, me, Paul, and Logan are all kind of wordy people. We like talking about this stuff. So if you disagree, if you agree, if you have some other thoughts about dystopian stuff and how it ties in, or lethal and non-lethal violence and what's going on there, or dog walking and great examples of dogs in comic books, or pretty much anything at all, text us or tweet at us, Facebook at us, leave comments on iTunes. We would love to hear from you. Check out some of our other podcasts by searching for Superhero Ethics on the Superhero Ethics podcast on iTunes, or you can follow us on our website where the RSS feed is found. So thank you guys again. Thank you all for listening, and we'll talk to you more soon.